Hello and welcome to episode 2 of TL Blue, your fortnightly cybersecurity podcast focused on important cybersecurity news for Australian organisations. My name's Brad Morgan and I'm the SOC manager at Triskel Labs. I'm joined today by our global DFIR lead, Richard Granger. Richard, what's on the agenda for today?
So we've got plenty of topics to talk about today, Brad. So ACSC Publications are plenty. They've been very busy at the ACSC over the past fortnight, so we're going to run through some of their publications. We're going to talk a bit about some Australians that are being notified of data breaches that have impacted them. We've got an interesting article that was published by the AFP for an IT contractor sentenced for cybercrime and fraud offences after swindling more than 60K. We've got the vulnerability of the week. And finally, we'll be rounding up with what we're seeing in the DFIR and the SOC teams this fortnight.
Gee, sounds like it's been a pretty busy couple of weeks there. So
it has, yes.
That's it. All right, well, let's jump straight in. Let's talk about the first of these ACSC publications.
Yes.
So I've got here the first one was an updated release around Vault Typhoon.
Yeah, so the ACSC seems that they're a bit of a joint advisory. So this has also been published by CISA, input from FBI and some other US government agencies, as well as international partners. But essentially, the crux of it is they are trying to raise awareness surrounding a threat group known as Vault Typhoon, which has been attributed to People's Republic of China, a state-sponsored cyber threat actor. And essentially, they're sort of just trying to raise the awareness for organizations in the United States and allied countries, which obviously includes us down here in Australia.
Yeah, look, that they are. I mean, it was a good number of weeks ago now that CISA came out and spoke about Vault Typhoon positioning themselves in US critical infrastructure organizations. And we had the ASD update a few weeks ago. And they did point out a particular country and a particular nation state actor. Not saying that was Vault Typhoon, but they're definitely calling out these organisations that are focusing on some of the Western countries, such as ourselves in the US. So I know in this article or in this release, they've made a number of recommendations. I'd love to get your thoughts on what those recommendations are, and we'll have a bit of a chat around those.
Yeah, so essentially what they're saying is that Vault Typhoon, they are known to not necessarily deploy malware, whether it's their own or other variants of malware. They're using a lot of living off the land binaries, which basically most of the time allows threat actors to kind of blend into normal sort of activity, right? So one of the really big call outs that they've got in this publication is ensuring that there's logging going on. And this is for access and security, and basically making sure that those logs are turned on, they're actually being logged, and importantly, they're going into some kind of central system. So like a SIEM, right?
Yeah, SIEM solution. I mean, it's what we've always said, right? If you can't see it, you can't detect it. You can't stop what you can't detect. And on the other hand of this is knowing what you're using in your environment when it comes to those LOLBAS type things. If you don't use PS exec in your environment, maybe write a detection that is going to give you a critical alert the second you see PS exec. Better still, find a way to kill it. That you don't have to have these things enabled if you're not using them in the environment.
That's right. And I think from our perspective in DFIR, as well as in the SOC, things like process creation logs that are actually capturing the command lines that are being entered, those things are incredibly helpful. We've had some engagements where Sysmon is installed in these systems, and that's like a gold mine because we can actually get a very clear understanding of what was run by the threat actor. And a lot of them, then they're not turned on. So we've got to sort of rely on other artifacts. But having this turned on and going into your SIEM, so you've got that long-term retention, it's absolutely critical.
It is. I completely agree. I mean, I'm a SOC manager. I believe in SIEM, right? If you're getting the logs, ship them out to the SIEM, build detections around them, as long as they provide security value. You know, there's a multitude of things you can do, and these guys are calling out a couple of the really easy ones, the low-hanging fruit, I think.
Yeah.
One of the other things I think really that they called out was quite interesting was for smaller organisations without an in-house capability, they're recommending that they look at managed security services. Now, I'm perfectly upfront. We are an MSSP. I mean, everyone who's listening to this podcast knows what we do. I think that's a really interesting one, and I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it's important because not every organization is going to have the internal capability to have an effective SOC. And not a lot of organizations are going to be able to have, the actual financial resources to employ, however many people it is going to be so that you have that full coverage. And that's where, sort of having an MSSP partner who does security, you can sort of really leverage their capabilities, because no one wants to be, manning the alerts at 3 a.m. in the morning. And that's kind of like where we can come in and assist with that, because we have a team that do that.
That's it. You mean your CISO doesn't want a phone call at 3 o'clock in the morning that someone's just logged in from America somewhere?
Only if it's really bad.
Exactly. That should always be coming through to us. One thing I will recommend to people, and something you just touched on there, is the number of people it takes to staff a SOC. And our headcount is continually growing. And, the more we mature, the more people we add in. But to anyone who's curious about what an accepted best practice is around staffing, I do highly recommend that they go and have a look at strategy 3, building a security SOC structure to match your organizational needs, which is within the book 11 Strategies of a World-Class Cybersecurity Operations Center. It's really, really insightful, and we'll include that link in the show notes.
Yep, absolutely.
One of the other areas that I found quite interesting, and a little bit of my background many years ago before I came over into cyber, was supply chain. I worked in procurement. So seeing that they're actually now calling out supply chain as an area of risk for cyber, I'd love to get your insights on that one.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a huge risk, is essentially you're opening up your environment to a third party. And we've seen things like SolarWinds is a really great example of where that can go wrong. So it's doing your due diligence around the parties that you're getting brought in to help an organization, that supply chain, and essentially keeping on top of, what they have access to, what can be done in the environment, and just sort of continually updating that as you progress, through that relationship with them as well.
Yeah. And look, in all honesty, it's 2024. Anything that we're looking at bringing into our environments should be secure by design as well. We should have confidence in our vendors that are coming to our environment, that they're not going to add additional risk.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, let's jump on to still topic 1, but article 2 from the ACSC. This one is cybersecurity for charities and non-profits.
Yeah, so this is an interesting one. They've sort of specifically called out, charities and not-for-profits in this, but I think this article is actually going to be quite beneficial for a lot of small to medium businesses in Australia. And it sort of starts off by, some stats for 2022-23. ASD received nearly 94,000 cybercrime reports. That's quite a lot, but also bear in mind that not every single cybercrime is reported to the ASD and the ACSC. And they're sort of calling out the key cyber threats for these smaller organizations is phishing, which, we know that's a very, very common thing that's happening at the moment. Business email compromise, again, very, very common, and also ransomware as well. Yeah,
look, and they're not just NFPs, as you say. They are affecting small businesses, medium businesses, even through to large enterprise. They are the current threats out in the cyber world at the moment, and they're things that we should all be taking steps to protect from. So they've obviously made a number of recommendations here, and I'll run through a couple. They're pretty basic. If you listen to our first episode, I'm pretty sure we covered a big chunk of these off.
We might be a broken record, but that's all right.
Look, I mean, when the ACSC comes out and says it,
Absolutely.
we're all on the same page. So turn on multi-factor authentication where possible, and that's not just on your 365. That's on if you use Xero, if you use MyOb, any of your accounting platforms, any SaaS platforms out there. Make sure you've got MFA enabled on those. Check the automatic updates are on and installed as soon as possible. So turn on your automatic Windows updates, your third-party updates. Make sure Chrome's updating automatically. Make sure they're installing properly. Run vulnerability scanning. Ensure that your users are restarting machines to allow updates to complete. That sort of basic thing. Backup important files. Ensure you've got backups. Test them. Make sure you can recover.
Yeah.
How often do you guys see backups fail?
A lot. And I think they've actually got a little case study down in this article as well, which I'll to sort of bring this into this particular point also, which is about a youth charity where they were backing up via USB drives. That was impacted by ransomware. Luckily, they had a USB that was off-site. So we do, unfortunately, encounter a lot of ransomware engagements where it is a smaller organization. They are relying just on those USB backups for, keeping their critical files, and then it's supposed to be rotated. Someone forgets. Ends up that, the backup's encrypted as well. So not a great situation. So I think with backups as well, look at cloud. Cloud backups is a really good solution, but also going back to your first point with MFAs, make sure that the backups in the cloud are securely stored. You got MFA, only certain people can actually access them and keep them nice and secure.
Definitely, and if you're taking backups on USB drives, make sure you've encrypted the USB drive as well. Don't have unencrypted backups out there. But again, make sure you know the passwords to be able to recover those, which actually moves into the next point there, which is use a reputable password manager to create strong, unique passwords or passphrases for accounts.
Yep.
We've been saying it for years and years and years, use strong, complex passwords, and we expect users to remember them. And it's impossible. I remember one password, and that's to my password vault. Someone asked me to log into Microsoft. I don't even know the password anymore.
Same.
It's
better that way.
Exactly. It's not going to. I know the password for my password vault, and that's it. And we need to, as organisations, we need to be empowering the staff within these teams to use these tools to uplift our security.
And a lot of the password managers as well, like they support, like team folders and stuff like that. So like, whilst we don't really recommend, account sharing and things like that, and that's a reason why a lot of people will use really sort of weak passwords, is because, everyone in the team accesses this thing. So you can
and don't rotate them.
Yes.
How often do we see passwords that have been rotated for 10 years?
All the time. But you can have a really complex password in this password vault and just share access to the team that need to access it. So, it just makes it a little bit more secure.
Yep, exactly. And again, it's like these were written to feed into each other. The next one there is user access controls and review them so that only staff who need access can review what they need for their duties.
Yeah. Yeah. Principle of least privilege. Not everyone needs to be able to access everything. Threat actors are, pretty good at getting a hold of accounts that can access everything, but, having that separation of access, it makes it that little bit harder for them.
Exactly. Look, I'm not going to go into all of these. We could go on, but I want to get to the case studies. So if anyone wants any more information, we'll put the link to this in the show notes. It's definitely worth a read. As Richard said at the top, it's not just for not-for-profits. These are recommendations that if you're running a small to medium business and you've not got a lot of budget there for your cyber, if you take these steps, you're at least putting some challenges in place for threat actors out there.
Yep.
I want to touch on these case studies, please, mate. So you've touched on the youth charity there. There was 2 instances here where there was a financial loss for organisations. I'll quickly touch on these. So one of them was $30,000 sent to the bank account details for a fraudulent invoice, and that was through a hacked email account for the charity itself. And the other was contacting a donor and asked them to change the bank account details using a spoofed domain, and that was a loss of $20,000. So we see BSEs like this on a daily basis. What are, beyond what we've just spoken about up above, what are the steps that an organisation can take? And tying back to that logging piece, how can, if the worst does happen, what logging do they need to have in place to ensure they can at least see what's happened and try to recover?
A really good thing to have is the sign-in logs from M365 feeding into something that has alerting on it. So I know Microsoft, I don't think it's in the basic licensing levels, but having things like impossible travel is really good. Having that going into a SIEM so someone can get an alert on it and start triaging it. Because what we do see is with the threat actors that are doing these business email compromises is they will often log in from somewhere else in the world. Not all the time. We do see them coming from Australia straight away, but normally, a really good indicator that something's not quite right is, a user based in Australia. They're logging in every day from, let's say, Sydney, and then all of a sudden we've got this login from Netherlands. And that's a really good sort of indicator to go, all right, maybe this person's traveling. It's always a possibility, but it also could be a threat actor that's gotten a hold of their account. So it's a really good indicator.
That's it. Set the red flashing light off and get the SOC analyst looking into it. And if they can't contact the user, at least contact someone internally who knows what's happening.
Yeah, and even if there's if they've got something like conditional access to block authentication from everywhere apart from Australia, those logs coming in saying that there was a failed login from Netherlands, and then all of a sudden there's a successful login from a low-cost VPN in Perth, also a bit of a red flag, needs to be investigated.
Definitely. And I mean, failed conditional access, if it's allowed through password and MFA and then failed on location, immediately that tells you that someone has got the credentials set and they've been able to bypass MFA somehow. So, that is another canary in that coal mine that you can utilize to have some early warning. So,
yep.
Cool. Let's leave that one there. Again, we'll put everything in the show notes and people can refer to that. If they've got questions, feel free to reach out as well. So the next one that I want to touch on is topic 2, and it's Australians being notified about data breaches.
Yeah, so we've had a couple of articles in the last fortnight regarding breaches. So the first one was for the Australian arm of car manufacturer Nissan. I'm sure everyone's very familiar with Nissan, where late last year they had a ransomware attack. It's allegedly by the group Akira, who claimed to have exfiltrated about 100 gigs of data. And on the 13th of March, Nissan updated their websites. They've had a bit of a running page where they're continually providing updates, which is quite good regarding the cyber incident. And then they posted on the 13th saying that they're beginning to notify individuals. There's about 100,000 that they expect to notify regarding the breach. So that's sort of one example there. And
so that, to me, that looks like a pretty good example of how to keep affected people updated early on in the process. And it's been handled quite well by Nissan from what I can see from the outside.
Yeah, a lot of transparency about, sort of what's happening, which is good, which is always good.
Yep.
Another large name that people might know, Subway. So in January this year, Lockbit breached Subway, claiming to have exfiltrated 200 gigs of data this time. And sort of quite close to home, on the 18th of March, a member of the DFIR team actually received an email from Subway Interesting worded email. So it doesn't mention anything about a breach and potential data that may have been impacted, but it was a reminder to. I might actually read it out here. So we'd like to remind you of the importance of account security and encourage you to strengthen your account by regularly changing your subcard account password. So not really, sort of addressing the breach from January.
It's about as clear as mud. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. So I think one of the things I'd like to explore with you regarding these two breaches and the impact is, I mean, you would have been impacted by breaches yourself, right?
I've had a couple, not too many. I've been pretty lucky actually, and I'm still using a pretty old email address, so I'm pretty happy with that.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we see quite often is, impacted individuals. They're like, "Why is it taking you so long to notify me? Tell me what's happened."
Well, that's it. I mean, let's look at the Nissan one, right? 100 gig of data, and they're saying it's approximately 100,000 users. That's a lot of data to go through and validate and find what's been exfiltrated. I mean, could you? I know what goes through the process, but you're the DFIR expert. Could you walk people who maybe don't know what the process is, what that process looks like when you're in the midst of a DFIR engagement, the discovery and validating that data?
Yeah. So identifying data exfiltration is one of the top priorities. Obviously, we want to make sure that the environment's contained. We want to know how they got in there, checking for persistence. But in terms of key questions for not only the client but other stakeholders involved, like legal, for example, is, do we have evidence of exfil? And that might take a day, that might take a couple of days to identify, depending on the state of the systems once we're brought in. So that process in itself, to say yes or no, evidence of data exfiltration, can take some time. And then it's a matter of trying to understand what actual data was taken. So if we're in a situation where we've got really good logging environment, we can be pretty granular and say, right, they access this server. We can see WinRAR being run on here. We can see these folders have been.
There's no need to legitimately run WinRAR in an environment, in my view, these days.
That's just one. They use lots.
I know. Any of these tools, alert on them, detect on them, and ring the fire alarm if these tools are being seen.
Yeah,
sorry,
absolutely.
I'll let you jump back into
that.
No,
I see where you're coming from. And so even just identifying the staging and then identifying what data was taken takes some time. And then you might be in a position where those servers are encrypted, right? So we can't even pull that data back to analyze it. It's got to be restored, which, depending on the backups and the size of them, that can take another week.
And let's be honest, an organization has to be able to function as well.
Yes.
If they can't recover their business and get back to what they are in business to do, well, there's no point making you aware, because they're not going to exist in 3 weeks' time.
Yeah.
So they have to recover to stop hemorrhaging money as well.
Yeah. And what I think is a really good sort of way of doing it, and again takes time, is if you were, impacted by a data breach, let's say, we'll use Nissan as an example here, would you prefer just a blanket statement saying some of your data may have been impacted, versus Brad, your driver's license, your bank account details, your passport number have been impacted, and these are the steps that you can do to mitigate the harm?
I would much rather know what's been done, as compared to a recent telco, perhaps, that didn't handle this very well at all. And people were questioning for a rather long period of time around what's been taken.
Yeah.
It is critically important to make the affected people completely aware of what's been compromised.
Yeah.
Because otherwise they're just left with more questions.
Yeah. And to understand that generally, there might need to be some kind of e-discovery process that's taken place, and that takes time to be able to go through all this data and pull out and say, all right, at the end of it, Brad's these are the details of Brad's that were impacted, and that's why Nissan, they were breached late last year. 13th of March, they're starting to contact people. That's just why these things can take some time for that thorough investigation and identifying all the impacted data.
And for that many records breach, I mean, any records breach, they have mandatory data breach reporting as well. So they have to get it right for that as well. So, and it's not to make it look like the people that have been compromised are less important, but they do have priorities to run through, and they have to get back to business. They have to be able to start making the government and the interested parties aware of what's happened. And then when they finally get that really important granular information, then they can make the end users aware. It's unfortunate, but it's just the way it works.
Yeah, and a lot of these streams happen in parallel as well, like the recovery efforts and the e-discovery. It's just sometimes these things do take time, especially when you're dealing with really large data sets.
Yep, exactly. All right. Let's try and move on to something I at least got a smile out of. Maybe not for a particular museum, but topic 3, an IT contractor sentenced for cybercrime and fraud offences after swindling more than $60,000. So
interesting.
Yeah. Did you want to run us through this one?
Yeah. So this is published by the AFP. And essentially, they've a Sydney man's been charged and sentenced for 2 years and 6 months, but essentially stealing $66,000 from the Australian National Maritime Museum. So essentially, he was a contract IT support worker who helped out the National Maritime Museum, and he had access to the accounts payable system. So essentially what he's gone and done there is access that accounts payable system, change bank account details in there to his own, and essentially been able to sort of get some money that way, which is, interesting.
Yeah. And I mean, it says here that the museum detected irregularities in its financial records in November 22 and reported the fraudulent activity to the AFP. They arrested the man at his home in March 23. So just on the previous comment there, November 22 to March 23, that's 5 months. It took them 5 months with Christmas in the middle to be able to do that investigation on one particular event. So it just goes to show how long these things do take. But I really want to tie this back to some of those other controls that we were mentioning earlier on. So could you, I guess, throw some of those out there? And I know we're going to sound like a broken record here because I know what the first one's going to be. Please enlighten us.
It's interesting. So as an IT contractor, I'm guessing that this particular individual would have had, I guess you can say legitimate, even though it was used in a nefarious manner, but legitimate access to those finance systems. But we do see a lot of the times in business email compromises that a threat actor may pivot into them as well. So having MFA on these systems is really important, because that way, if they do just get the username and password, try and log into your Xero, try and do something, they're essentially unable to.
Yep. But I mean, he's an IT contractor. Least privilege. Does he need to have access to these platforms? We don't know the ins and outs of this case. Maybe that's what he was employed to do. But again, then that comes back to your procurement and making sure that you're running the appropriate checks through the onboarding process to make sure that you are onboarding appropriate contractors who have appropriate controls in place when they're onboarding their staff. I mean, this guy could have been a sole trader, we don't know, but there are controls in place that you can put through all the way through the process here. So but it is, again, critically important to have that logging enabled. Without the logging enabled, it's very, very difficult to go and tie all these events together.
Yeah, we've sort of seen this play out in some engagements before, and having the logging turned on it's critical, because you can basically see, all right, they logged in from this IP address, they change this record from this to that, which just happens to be, their bank account details. So it's important to have that information available so you can go back and look at this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like it was a crime of opportunity. He went and spent money on four-wheel drive parts and what they're calling some high-powered computer equipment. Doesn't sound overly sophisticated. If I was in that position, I'd be setting up a number of different bank accounts to try and make sure you couldn't tie it back to me. But hey, that could be why it took him 5 months to go and pick him up.
Yeah.
All right, I think we've said all we can on that one. Let's touch on topic 4, vulnerability of the week, CVE 2023 48788. Now, I was on leave on Friday, but I still noticed that the ACSC published a critical advisory for this one. Can you talk us through it?
Yeah, so essentially the advisory has kind of been that reports are silently updated to say that it's now being exploited in the wild.
That's a concerning phrase there, silently.
Yes.
From a vendor.
Yeah. So that's quite interesting that's been said. But essentially what it is it's affecting 40 client EMS versions 7.0 and 7.2. We'll have the exact version numbers in the show notes below, but essentially enables an unauthenticated threat actor to gain remote code execution with system privileges on unpatched servers. So very powerful vulnerability. This is sort of on par with some of the proxy shell stuff we've seen, Log4j, being able to get that system level privilege on servers. It's a really, really powerful initial foothold for threat actors. Yeah,
so and I believe that the POC is on GitHub. So if you haven't already run these patches, you need to get these things offline. You need to be able to put some controls in place. And realistically, at this point, if you haven't, you should actually be looking for compromises, is my view.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on that one, mate?
Yeah, if you've still got this connected to the internet, get it off the internet. Definitely look at doing some threat hunts in the environment for any evidence of exploitation, because unfortunately we've seen similar vulnerabilities during DFIR engagements where a threat actor gets in and they move laterally to other systems and deploy persistence on there, and they come in and patch the initial access server, and everything's all good, we're all done, and then months later a threat actor uses that persistence on the other servers to come back. So very important there.
Cool. I think we'll have a look and see if we can get any of the IOCs, depending on what their TLP is, and we'll include them in the show notes for this one as well.
Yep.
Just in case people out there aren't ACSC partners or aren't privy to that information, we'll try and share what we can.
Absolutely.
All right. Our last topic, what we're seeing in the SOC and DFIR. Mate, I'll throw this one over to you.
Yeah, so nothing too sort of dissimilar to what we've been seeing in the last few weeks. A lot of business email compromise is occurring, similar to what we sort of talked about last week. A lot of MFA bypass, we're seeing that as well. So again, the same sort of things that we've said before, making sure you've got MFA on there, you've got conditional access. You sort of go through and look at all the other compensating controls that you can have in the environment to thwart things like evil Gen X and the session token theft, just to make the life of threat actors a little bit harder.
That's it. And I know, this is one of those things that I would like us to dig into in the future here is what other controls people can leverage within Microsoft 365, because I think there is a lot more that people can do depending on the licensing. But there's unfortunately no one alert I could go and put my hands on this week and go, hey, I really want to talk about this. We are just absolutely drowning in phishing triage and those sorts of things as well. So unfortunately, DFIR and SOC are both saying the same thing from different locations, but we are it is what's out there at the moment. So yeah, just make sure you've got your MFA and conditional access in place, and training your users to be able to spot those phishing emails, because they're getting better.
100% they are. Yep.
Cool. Excellent. Well, mate, that's all we've got this week. So thank you very much for your time, and thank you to the listeners as well. If you've got any feedback, please pass it through to us at tlblue@triskelllabs.com. Thank you very much.
Thanks all.
Thanks, Rich.
Cheers.